More than 13,000 rounds came down on the American line on the 4th of May, 1945, and it was the last time anything like that happened on Okinawa. After it, the shelling thinned. It did not stop, and men kept dying under it for another 7 weeks. But the thing that had been arriving in coordinated masses arrived instead in ones and twos, and the men lying in the mud on the forward slopes noticed the change well before anybody at a headquarters wrote it down. It is worth saying plainly what that country was like, because the terrain is most of the explanation. Southern Okinawa is a series of coral ridges running roughly east and west, one behind another, with soft going between them and almost no cover on the open faces. The rock is soft enough to dig and hard enough to hold a roof over what has been dug. The island is honeycombed with natural caves and with heavy stone tombs built into the hillsides, and the Japanese 32nd Army had spent the better part of a year putting its army inside them. In the second half of May, the rains arrived, and the low places between the ridges turned into something that swallowed vehicles to the axle and men to the knee. A rifleman on a forward slope in that weather could see the ridge in front of him and nothing else. He could not see a single gun, he could hear them, and he could watch what they did to the men around him, and in 6 weeks of climbing hills, he might never once lay eyes on the weapon that was doing it. That was the point of the ridges. A Japanese field piece on Okinawa lived inside the coral. It was rolled out through a cave mouth on a prepared apron, laid, fired, and pulled back in, sometimes inside a minute, and the mouth was closed behind it. Air photographs did not find it because there was nothing on the surface to photograph. Naval gunfire could take a hillside apart and leave it untouched. American veterans of the earlier island campaigns said afterward that they had never seen Japanese artillery in that quantity or handled that well. And for the first month ashore, the American answer to it was to accept the losses and keep walking up the hill. So the question is, what changed at the beginning of May? And the answer to it runs backward from the quiet. In the 2 days after the 4th, counter-battery fire destroyed about 40 Japanese artillery pieces. On the 4th itself, it had destroyed 19. These were not shells landing in a general area and doing general damage. Light spotter aircraft were picking out individual weapons, and the heavy guns of the 10th Army walked onto them until they came apart, one at a time, in front of the crews that served them. Nothing on that scale had happened in April, and nothing on that scale happened again. By the 6th, the 32nd Army had ordered what was left of its artillery back into the caves. From then on, the gun that had been the most feared thing on the island came out rarely, fired briefly, and went back in. American combat fatigue cases fell off in the same week, which is one of the few places in the record where the effect of enemy shell fire on an infantryman is written down as a figure by the people who counted it. The 27th Tank Regiment never fought as a mobile unit again either. Its handful of surviving medium tanks were dug in northwest of Shuri as fixed guns and pillboxes, which is what a tank becomes when the ground it would have to cross is watched. What had put the guns in the open in the first place was an order, and that order is the document this whole story turns on. On the night of the 3rd and 4th of May, the guns, howitzers and mortars of Major General Kosuke Wada's 5th Artillery Command, were to move out of their concealed positions and into the open. There was nothing careless about it. A piece firing from inside a cave mouth is boxed in by the rock around it, limited in how far it can be raised and how far it can be swung, and those limits set how deep into the American position it can reach and how much ground it can cover once it gets there. Wada was being asked to support an offensive across the whole front. There is no version of that where the guns stay in the caves and also reach the targets. Wada had not learned his trade from a manual. His command had fought at Bataan. Most of his men had served together for years, and the Japanese army rated them among its best gunners. Nearly every artillery piece on Okinawa outside one divisional regiment answered to him alone, which was unusual for a Japanese force and gave the 32nd Army a heavier concentration of artillery under one command than any Japanese force had brought to a Pacific battle before. Much of it had been on its way to the Philippines when Imperial headquarters turned the shipments toward the Ryukyus as that campaign went from contested to lost. One of his regiments had not begun life as a field unit at all, and until shortly before had been the fortress artillery of Nakagusuku Bay. The offensive those guns were supporting had been argued out in a cave under Shuri 2 weeks earlier. On the 20th of April, Major General Isamu Cho pressed Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima to go over to the offensive. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the Army's senior staff officer for operations, said it was premature and that the Army's business was to make the Americans buy every ridge at the highest price it could set. Yahara was overruled. He had written the defensive scheme the Army was then fighting, and he lost the argument to a chief of staff who wanted to do something. It went in at dawn on the 4th and failed in every part. Marine fire tore apart a barge landing behind the flank before it touched the shore. The 24th Division went at the American line frontally and wrecked itself doing it, its leading regiment down within a day to a fraction of its strength. The 32nd Army lost thousands of men across the 2 days. Cho, who had pushed hardest of anyone, afterward abandoned all hope of a successful outcome. In reports his own headquarters treated as reliable, a Japanese lieutenant put it into his diary more directly, writing that they knew they were doomed when they heard the 24th Division had failed. Yahara got a promise out of Ushijima that the Army would go back to fighting his way, and the promise was kept. The artillery it would have been fought with was already gone. Now the other side of it, which is the part almost nobody writes about, because it amounted to about 40 men and 100 yards of wire. Late in the preparations for Okinawa, sound locator teams were rushed out from Fort Benning to join the invasion. There were 5 teams of 8 men, with 2 sound locator sets, the GR6 to a team. The principle behind them is old. It is not complicated. 2 listening posts go in at either end of a baseline about 100 yards long, and a wire runs between them. Each takes a bearing on the sound of a gun firing. Where the 2 bearings cross is where the gun is standing. From there, the officer running the chute has a choice. He can put a general area concentration down on the intersection and hope, or he can send a light aircraft to the spot and let the pilot work over that patch of hillside until he finds the weapon itself and then destroy it with a direct hit. 2 microphone stations, a wire, a plotting board, and a Piper Cub. There was more to the American apparatus than that, and the rest of it had been in place since before the landing. A field artillery group had put its heavy guns onto a low sandy islet off the west coast in the last days of March, with a strip for spotter aircraft beside them, and from dawn on April 1st, those guns were firing counter-battery and interdiction deep into the southern part of the island. The Japanese saw the danger of that position at once. Ushijima ordered a surprise shelling of the islet at midnight on March 31st and directed that infiltration units be sent across to wipe out the American strongpoint in one blow. Neither the shelling nor the raids removed it. It should be said clearly that the sound locating sets were new on Okinawa, that the teams came together at the last minute, and that the surviving record does not allow anyone to separate cleanly what the locators found from what the pilots found from what the infantry reported, and the 10th Army's own account of the campaign, put together afterward from the statements of the officers who had run its staff sections, describes the method and describes the result without attempting that breakdown. Anyone who tells the story with a precise share assigned to each is filling in a gap the participants left open. The Japanese understood perfectly well that the aircraft were the danger. That is why Wada ringed his firing positions with anti-aircraft guns. and why smoke pots were burned over the batteries to cover the muzzle flashes. Both measures were sensible. Both were beaten the same way. American artillery put area concentrations down across the positions. The anti-aircraft crews went into their holes because staying at the guns meant dying at them. And while they were under cover, the spotter aircraft came over the top and looked. By the 6th of May, the Americans had a location for most of Wada's heavy pieces. On the 2nd, they had almost none. 40 men with a wire strung between two microphones do not get a monument, and in most campaign histories, they get about a paragraph. Pulling that paragraph back out is most of what happens on this channel. Subscribe, and more of them get dug up. That is the part of this that is easy to get wrong, and it matters. No American document existed listing every Japanese gun on Okinawa. The photographs had not found them, because a gun inside a hill leaves nothing on a photograph to interpret. What the Americans had was a method for turning a firing gun into a grid reference. A fleet of small, unarmed aircraft to confirm it, and the patience to wait for the Japanese to hand them something to work with. On the night of the 3rd of May, the 32nd Army handed them everything at once. Wada's command fired the largest coordinated preparation of the campaign from open ground in daylight across 2 days in front of an army that had spent a month learning that hillside. The gunners were doing what artillery is for. The order was not foolish, and the men who carried it out were not careless. They were asked to support an offensive that their own senior operations officer had said would not work. And to do it, they had to leave behind the one thing that had kept them alive. The ledger at the end reads about as follows: 19 guns on the 4th of May and something near 40 more across the 2 days after, against an offensive that gained no ground and cost the Army the divisions it would need for the rest of the battle. Those counts are the Army's own, and they do not sit comfortably beside every account written since, some of which give the smaller figure for the entire operation rather than for a single day, and nobody should pretend that difference has been settled. What is not in dispute is what became of the survivors. The remaining pieces went back into the corral and stayed there, firing when they could, singly, into the rain and the mud of the last 7 weeks. The 32nd Army finished the battle fighting exactly the way Yahara had wanted to fight it from the beginning, with the difference that it no longer had the guns.